Dave Talks Comics, Episode 17. Dave Talks Comics is a collection of my thoughts, memories, and musings on comics I have read. Dave Talks Comics can be found on the web at davetalkscomics.com. On Twitter at Dave Talks Comics. Emails can be sent to dave@davetalkscomics.com. On this episode of Dave Talks Comics, I'm going to be talking about Action Comics number 545 and 546, Marvel Tales number 192, Blackhawk numbers 2 and 3, the second volume of Darwin Cook's The Spirit, and Dames in the Atomic Age. I talk from my notes on these comics. I don't go panel by panel. I try to do more than just summarize the stories. This is not a spoiler-free podcast. Dave Talks Comics is not a member of the Spoiler-Free Podcast Network. I try not to spoil everything, but in the process of talking about these comics, I will almost certainly spoil them in some way. Finally, I want to thank Derek Coward for the nice things he said about Dave Talks Comics on a recent episode of Comic Book Noise. If you want to hear what Derek had to say, then check out episodes 339 and 340 of Comic Book Noise. Comic Book Noise can be found on the web at comicbooknoise.com. Action Comics 545 and 546. On a previous issue episode of Dave Talks Comics, I talked about Action Comics 544, which was an anniversary, 45th fabulous anniversary issue, and featured the introduction of the new looks for Lex Luthor and Brainiac in two separate stories. It was a big double-sized issue, $1.50 cover price, as compared to, I believe, 60 cents was the regular cover price at that time. It had a cover date of June 83. These were cover dated respectively July and August of 1983. So the Lex Luthor story in Action Comics 544 was a one-off. So it was all self-contained, and I thought it was pretty good. I'd go back and listen to that episode if you want to hear more about it. The Brainiac story in that issue was the first of a three-parter. The second part, which is titled With But a Single Step, and these are both written by Marv Wolfman and drawn by Gil Kane, opens with Superman. He's been beaten by Brainiac, and Brainiac takes him into custody, captures him, starts to perform experiments on him, but then Superman manages to escape and basically makes his way back to Earth. I'm not crazy about the art in this. There are some good panels, and it's not so much that Gil Kane doesn't know how to draw. It's just not as pretty as some of Gil Kane's other work that I've read. And I think that's what turns me off about the look of the art in this book, in this particular issue, issue 545. One thing to note is that there is an appearance by a few kind of B or C level DC heroes, and that is Cave Carson and Rip Hunter and the Sea Devils and Dane Dorrance, who is Dolphin? I'm not sure. But No, Dane Dorrance is one of the Sea Devils. Yes. Okay. So it's only like a one-page appearance, and they're kind of talking about, I don't know if this is foreshadowing for something that's coming up, or it kind of implies that it is. Kind of implies, because this is before Brainiac arrives on Earth, so it can't be that. So this must be some sort of foreshadowing. Anyway, on to issue 546. Now, 546, Superman's back on Earth. Brainiac has followed him to Earth. Superman enlists the Justice League and the new Teen Titans to help him out. So it's basically a big showdown with Brainiac. One thing I did like about this issue, as much as I wasn't crazy about Gil Kane's pencils in the prior issue, pencils and inks, because I believe he's inking himself here, is it was kind of neat to see him drawing some of these heroes that I'd never seen him draw before. Heroes for like the Titans. And some of the characters from the Justice League. I don't know if Gil Kane ever drew any issues of Justice League or not. And also to note is there is one blow-up moment when Lois Lane, and this has absolutely nothing to do, as far as I can tell, with a fight between Superman and Brainiac, but Lois Lane notices that blows up, that's a good way to put it, blows up because Lana Lang has stolen her interview. And that is kind of like the Sea Devils, the appearance of the Sea Devils and Rip Hunter. It's a one-page event and doesn't really seem to connect to anything, but it does seem to imply, maybe because I haven't read the issues that come after this, that maybe this is some foreshadowing of what's to come next. Oh, and then there's also a full-page ad for the first issue of Batman and the Outsiders, which I think is really neat. Because I used to read Batman and the Outsiders back in the day, and so that's it for Action Comics 545 and 546, and the three-parter that features the new look of Brainiac versus Superman. Marvel Tales number 192. This is a reprint issue. It reprints Amazing Spider-Man, I believe it's 120 and 121. I'm not sure on the exact date of those. This reprint issue came out in October of 86. The first of these issues is the death of Gwen Stacy. It's the issue in which Gwen Stacy is kidnapped by the Green Goblin, and Spider-Man has to go to rescue her, and in the process of trying to rescue her, she is thrown off a bridge, and her neck snaps, and she dies. And that's how the issue ends. But one interesting fact is that I was reading this at the same time I was reading those issues of Action Comics that I just spoke about, and this is also drawn by Gil Kane, but it's just penciled by Gil Kane. It's inked by John Romita Sr., I'm pretty sure, and Tony Mortellaro. And these are some beautiful pages by Gil Kane. This is some really nice pages by Gil Kane. I especially like the pages where you have, like, you can see Peter Parker reflecting back on things that have happened, and so you have him surrounded by images of the past. But this is a much more nicely drawn issue. And it's well told, too. It's well told. So the first issue, basically, this is kind of partly fallout from what came before, which was Harry Osborn. Yes, Harry Osborn, because Norman Osborn is the Green Goblin. Harry Osborn, his son, is having drug problems and is sick, and Norman had forgotten that he was the Green Goblin, but then he remembers he's the Green Goblin, or the Green Goblin is kind of like an alternate personality that takes over and comes back to the surface. And so a good deal of this first issue is Peter Parker trying to track down the Green Goblin, and you also have Norman Osborn having hallucinations, and this is just really some great stuff and some great storytelling, I think. I enjoy this. And, of course, it winds up on, is it the Brooklyn Bridge? I'm not sure which bridge it is. But on one of the yes, the Brooklyn Bridge. Here it is, the Brooklyn Bridge. And there's just some great art in here. And once again, the issue ends with the way it was originally pitched, the way it was originally sold, the original cover, which you don't get on this reprint issue, is that somebody's going to die, but who will it be? And then you don't get the title until the very end of the issue when you see Spider-Man holding Gwen Stacy's dead body in his arms. And the title is The Night Gwen Stacy Died. And then the next issue is titled The Goblin's Last Stand, and this is the issue in which Spider-Man just basically he's determined to bring down the Goblin, not just to bring down the Goblin, but to kill him, and he comes very, very close to doing it. And of course, in the end, he doesn't kill the Goblin, but the Goblin does get killed by his own glider, which Spider-Man jumps out of the way. The Goblin tries to use the glider to kill Spider-Man, and Spider-Man jumps out of the way, and the glider impales him. And I can remember reading this issue, it might have even been this issue of Marvel Tales back in the day, and being really struck by it. And I remember going back and forth and not being able to believe that they'd actually that the Goblin had been killed, and he'd been killed by his own glider, and it was so crazy. And of course the Goblin's always this freaky looking character. I mean, he was always freaky looking, and I really like how they drew him, how John Romita Jr. drew him, even how Steve Ditko drew him, and certainly how Gil Kane draws him in this. So this is a fun read. It's a really good read, and it's really well told, both visually and oh yes, the writer is Jerry Conway for both these issues. And these both were reprinted in Marvel Tales number 192, which I picked up for something like $1, and I think the cover price is $1.25. So Marvel Tales 192, reprinting The Death of Gwen Stacy and The Death of the Green Goblin. Blackhawk, issues 2 and 3. This is the 1988 miniseries, which was written and drawn, I believe, by Howard Chaykin with some help from Steve Olive and Ken Bruzenak. I previously spoke about the first issue in this series, this miniseries, which is just the 3 issues, and I wasn't terribly, I was a little, I don't know if I would say I was dismissive of it, but I certainly had issues with it or problems with it. I had trouble getting into it. And I found that as I continued to read this series, it started to make more sense, or at the very least, I started to understand what Chaykin was doing with this series. I'm still not sure that I would call it a home run, but I enjoyed it more the further I got into it. So the story revolves around, Blackhawk is an aviator, a leader of a group called the Blackhawks, and they are from various countries. They're all from various countries that were, I believe they all are, from various countries that were invaded and taken over by the Nazis. So this is set during World War II. And the story revolves around a few things, one of which is that there's an atomic bomb or something like an atomic bomb, and this is very early in the war, I think. Well, I think it's before the U.S. has entered. Yes, I'm pretty sure it's before the U.S. has entered the war, something like 40 or 41. Of course, the U.S. didn't enter the war until December of 41. And so there's this atomic bomb that has been captured from the U.S. and has kind of traveled around the world a little bit. And Blackhawk is trying to track it down. Unfortunately, he does not get to it before the bad guys get to it. And that's kind of what this is about. I think this series is kind of, Chaikin is writing this kind of as a noir story. You know, it's disjointed, and I think that's a word I used when I described the first issue. It's very disjointed. It's choppy. It jumps around a lot. There are a number of different characters, and they interact in various different ways. There's a senator who is sympathetic towards the Nazis, or at least, yeah, I think that's a fair way to describe it. Sympathetic towards the Nazis, and is helping this British guy who was also sympathetic towards the Nazis, who wants to bomb. Basically, he wants to take the bomb and drop it over on New York City. And so Blackhawk is trying to find him, trying to capture him, but it takes a while to put all the pieces together and to figure out, and they kind of seem to be one step behind. And eventually they do, you know, this is a comic book, so it shouldn't come as any great surprise that the good guys win in the end. But how it happens and how it comes to pass, and I think it's pretty good as an intrigue book, as a spy type story set during World War II. And one of the interesting things, I guess, about the bad guy is that he is dying of cancer or something like that. I think it's lung cancer. And so he really doesn't have anything to lose, which makes him a little bit scarier, or a little bit more believable that he would be willing to do something as desperate as drop a bomb over New York City, or onto New York City. Let's see, there's some other things that are interesting about this. I mean, there were some like news pieces, there are some like a cover to life, except they call it live, and there's some articles that that Chaikin includes in this story, which kind of help to flesh things out a little bit. There's a little bit of romance between Blackhawk and the woman who becomes known as Lady Blackhawk, who I believe is Russian, but I'm not certain on that. And it's a good read. If you like Blackhawk, I'd say it's a definite must read. If you like noir, you might enjoy this. I don't think it's a grand slam. I don't think it's a home run, but I think it's certainly a decent read. It was certainly worth my time. I think I paid about $1 an issue for these, so I don't feel like I got cheated. I think there is a trade available of these. And so that's it for the 1988 Blackhawk miniseries by Howard Chaikin. The Spirit by, this is Will Eisner's The Spirit by Darwin Cook, Volume 2, which collects the rest of the issues that Darwin Cook wrote and drew, in addition to some other material. The first issue in here, which I believe is issue 7 of the series, is not written and drawn by Darwin Cook. He did the cover for it, but it's 3 stories, each done by a different team. Let's see, the first one is by Walt Simonson and Chris Sprouse and Carl Story. And I don't know, I didn't really care for it. It didn't do anything for me. The second one was much better. The second one is, let me make sure I get this right now. The second story is written by Jimmy Palmiotti with the art by Jordi Bernay, colors by Dave Stewart. And much better story. It feels much more like an Eisner story because the focus is kind of on a building, and Eisner, who was the creator of the Spirit, a lot of his stories, not just his Spirit stories, but his other stories would focus around the people who lived in New York City, which is where the Spirit is set. And quite often, how people interacted, people from different backgrounds and different cultures. And you get a lot of that in this short story. And I think it's only 8 pages long, it's called Synchronicity. And that's my favorite of these 3. And then the third one is by Kyle Baker. And sometimes I've liked Kyle Baker's art. I liked his take on Captain America for that Captain America, The Truth, was it? Which I thought that was very good. But this story just didn't really do it for me. And I think part of the reason why the 2 stories didn't do it for me is because I'm so fixated on Darwin Cook's approach to the spirit, and also Will Eisner. I've read some of Will Eisner's stories, a few of his spirit stories, and so I'm possibly unfairly comparing these stories mentally to the works of Eisner and Cook, and that's probably not fair. But anyway, that's how or why I feel that way. Okay, so the next issue, finally, you get back to a story by Darwin Cook, and this one is called Time Bomb, and this one also brings back a character from the first collection, which is Silk Satin, and basically the whole story revolves around trying to defuse a time bomb, and the catch is that Silk Satin is the only one who can do it, and she and the spirit are locked in this, what looks like an old water tower, and she gets hit on the head and forgets who she is and how to defuse the bomb. And so, which creates some problems, and then the FBI is thinking about bombing, about wiping out the water tower, and so the spirit has to try and figure out how to bring back her memory, which leads to some moments that are both humorous and also some moments that are a little more touching. And I thought it was a really good issue. The next issue kind of brings in something it brings back something also, and it's called El Morte. And the spirit is a guy who came back from the dead. I mean, I guess that's part of the reason why they call him the spirit. Danny Colt is his real name. And this issue brings back a character from the first collection from a few issues ago who also came back from the dead. But unlike Danny Colt, he looks considerably more, his body has decomposed to a degree. So he's a little bit more like a zombie. And his name was Alvaro Mortez. And you get him. So basically, Danny Colt gets shot, and Commissioner Dolan gets shot, and he has to try and track them down. And you also get a section in here which I think is kind of neat, because Danny Colt's, the spirit's friend, who's the cab driver? I'm blanking on his name right now. Maybe it'll come back to me. Ebony White, is that it? So he goes looking for. So you get him for a few pages while the spirit is in the hospital after this first encounter with Mortez, and then you get Mortez's point of view, and you get Mortez's story of what happened. And then you get Mortez's mother's story, because she's some kind of a witch or something. And this doesn't really end. This particular issue kind of ends on a cliffhanger. But it doesn't really... But it doesn't pick up in the next issue. But it kind of lays the ground for what's to come next. Now, the next issue I really didn't care for. It's called Death by Television. I thought it was kind of stupid. I mean, the art's beautiful, and certainly the visual storytelling's there, but the story itself did nothing for me. It had this weird ending, and it's some sort of a commentary on television and the media and things like that, but it really didn't work for me. It did not speak to me. So then the next issue, we get back to the story about Mortez. And I think this is the one that actually wraps it up. It introduces a couple new characters. The spirit's girlfriend, or the girl who wants to be his girlfriend if she isn't his girlfriend, because he always seems to be palling around with all sorts of women, like Silk Satin a few issues back. Ellen Dolan, her roommate from college, she enlists his help to try and help with the situation with these zombies. And apparently he's some sort of an expert on various things. It takes a little convincing, but he finally buys into what Ellen is trying to tell him. So this is a big showdown with Mortez, and he's also brought back all these other zombies, or maybe it's his mother who has brought back the zombies. And so it's kind of a lot of action and a lot of great visual storytelling as far as the action goes. But if you're looking for character moments, I don't think there's a heck of a lot of that in here. There's definitely some good action and some neat twists, and as always, Dave Stewart's colors are gorgeous. So then the next issue is the last issue that Darwin Cook wrote and drew, although it isn't the last issue in this collection. And this issue brings back into sans serif. And Darwin Cook does something great in this issue. I'm not entirely certain if it's just him, or maybe this is also partly Jay Bone, but I think it's probably him. He tells the story. Part of the story is told in flashbacks, and he draws the flashbacks in a different style, and the flashbacks are colored kind of in a sepia toned. Well, it's not a two-tone, but it's definitely a lot of gray and kind of a pale, kind of washed out kind of look to it. Well, not washed out. I mean, the lines are clear, but the colors are kind of bland. But they're done beautifully. So once again, the city is at risk, or something's at risk. Sans serif is this friend from a girl from Spirit's past. They grew up together, but they went different ways. She became a criminal, he did not. And she's mixed up with some people that he's trying to track down. And so you get a lot of flashbacks that go back and tell the story of the two of them and his efforts, both when they were friends and then after they kind of broke apart, and what happened to them, and his efforts to help her out. And it's a great story. It's a great story. It's certainly my favorite, probably, from this collection. Possibly from the entire series, but I probably have to go back and read the first collection to really decide one way or another. And then the last issue is another one of these stories, or another one of these issues that collects several stories, 3 stories, by other people about the Spirit, though. And so there's nothing in here by Darwin Cook in this last chapter. And honestly, it didn't do a whole lot for me. I'd say the most interesting thing is the third story is told without words. It's told all in pictures. And that one's by Gail Simone and Phil Hester and Andy Parks. And I thought that was kind of neat, but the story itself didn't do anything. Didn't do enough for me. But on the whole, the Darwin Cook stuff is great. And I think the Darwin Cook Spirit stuff is great. For the most part. There's a few issues that didn't do anything for me, like the one about the television, which did nothing for me. Let's see, Death by Television or something like that. But on the whole, The Spirit, Volume 2 by Darwin Cook, awesome. Dames in the Atomic Age. The main story in this is written by Christopher Ryder and drawn by Mark Sandroni. This was published by The Art of Fiction, LLC. And this is a story about a couple guys. The story is set in the 50s, I believe, or maybe it's the late 40s. And it's about a detective who finds out that he's been hired by a doctor to find out who his wife has been cheating on him with, and only to find out that the person who is sleeping with his client's wife is his friend, who's a boxer. And then there's these weird characters who talk in this weird way and carrying ray guns. And there's all these neat, which there's some sci-fi elements in this which are reminiscent of the sort of things that you would see on movie posters or in movies, science fiction type movies from that era, like giant ants and aliens and ray guns. And then this book is also peppered with these little extra art pieces, which kind of help to flesh things out, like a poster that for the boxing match, and advertisements, and a 2 pages of cartoon strips. And let's see, I'm flipping through this. Let's see what else. A billboard for a new housing development, and I'm not sure if this stuff sounds appealing to most people or not, but in my opinion, it helps to flesh things out. And a pulp magazine cover, or it kind of looks almost like an EC Comics cover. And so the main story is written and drawn by the same people, and it's a fun ride. It reminded me in ways of the Martian Manhunter miniseries that was by there was a Martian Manhunter miniseries from I want to say it was the early 90s or maybe the late 90s. It was 3 issues, a Martian Manhunter, or something like American Secrets or something like that, which I thought was very good. And it was also set in the 1950s and kind of had that weird feel to it, where you had aliens and weird things going on in this very kind of Leave It to Beaver type setting. And so you get that big contrast between, on the one hand, the feeling like everything's supposed to be normal, and then on the other hand, that there's all this weird stuff going on, like aliens and mind control and ray guns and stuff like that. And I picked this up at the Baltimore Comic-Con, I think back in 2012, and I've only just now got around to reading it, and I kind of disappointed myself for taking so long to get around to reading it, because it was really a fun read. And I don't know, it speaks to me. It's up my alley. So maybe this is maybe I'm not the typical reader for it, but I think it's a really great read. So it's called Dames in the Atomic Age, and it's by Art of Fiction Press, and I believe you can find them, or the Art of Fiction LLC, and I believe you can find them online and possibly order it from them. That's it for episode 17 of Dave Talks Comics. Questions or comments can be sent to me via Twitter at Dave Talks Comics, or via email to dave@davetalkscomics.com, or you can post them on the episode page, which can be found on the web, davetalkscomics.com.